I'm going to tell you about the worst summer of my life and the best thing that came out of it, and I need you to understand something before I start. I'm not the hero of this story. An 11-year-old kid is. I just tried to keep up. We were 4 days into a 2-week fishing trip, Boundary Waters, northern Minnesota. If you've never been, I can't explain it to you in a way that does it justice, but I'll try. It's the kind of quiet that has weight to it. No cell towers, no traffic. Just water and pine and sky so big it makes your problems feel the size they actually are, which is small. Usually. Zach and I were on the dock. The light was doing that thing it does up there around 7 in the evening, where everything goes gold and the lake looks like somebody poured honey over it. He had his line in the water. I had mine. We hadn't talked in maybe 20 minutes, and that was fine. That was one of the things I loved about this kid. He didn't fill silence with noise. Most adults can't sit still for 5 minutes without reaching for a phone. Zach could sit on a dock for an hour and just be. So when he spoke, I heard every word like a gunshot. "Vin, Mom's cheating on us, isn't she?" He didn't look at me. He kept watching his line. His voice was flat. Not angry, not sad. Just this bone-dry, matter-of-fact tone that no 11-year-old should be capable of. I want to tell you my first reaction was noble. That I had some clear-headed paternal instinct kick in. But the truth is, everything inside me seized up like a machine that's been thrown into reverse at full speed. There's this sound a conveyor belt makes right before it snaps. A high, tight whine. And that's what I heard inside my own head. But here's the thing about working in a mineral processing plant for 15 years. When alarms go off, you don't panic. You assess. You identify the problem. You shut down the right systems in the right order. You panic later, in the parking lot, sitting in your truck with the engine off. So I kept my voice level. "What makes you say that, bud?" I hear her on the phone, late, when she thinks I'm sleeping. He reeled in his line a little, adjusted his bobber. Completely casual, like he was telling me about a book he'd read. She says, "I love you," in this voice. It's not how she talks to you. It's not how she talks to Grandma. How many times have you heard this? Many. Not once. Not a couple of times. Many. This kid had been carrying this around like a stone in his pocket, and I hadn't noticed. I'd been too busy being a good husband to a woman who was making a fool of me. And I hadn't seen that the boy sitting 3 feet away was drowning in something he couldn't name. And the word he used, us. Not on you, Vin. On us. He felt it too. The betrayal wasn't just mine. It was his. Because when you're 11 and a man shows up in your life and fixes your bike and builds you a treehouse and takes you fishing every summer and never misses a single school play, even the terrible one where you played a tree, that man becomes yours. And when your mother risks that, she's not just risking her marriage. She's risking you. I put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't squeeze. I just rested it there. "Thank you for telling me," I said. That's all I said. I didn't ask anything else. I didn't promise anything. I didn't say it would be okay, because I didn't know if it would be. We sat there until the light drained out of the sky and the mosquitoes got bad enough to drive us inside. I heated up canned chili on the camp stove, and we ate without talking much, and then Zach climbed into his sleeping bag and was out cold in 10 minutes, the way kids can just shut off when they're exhausted. I lay awake until 3 in the morning. The ceiling of that cabin had a water stain in the shape of Lake Superior. I'd stared at it every summer for 4 years and never once thought it was anything other than charming. That night, it just looked like damage. like something that had been leaking for a long time before anybody noticed. I made one decision before I fell asleep. I was not going to ruin this trip. These 2 weeks belonged to Zach. He'd waited all year for them. Whatever was waiting for me back in Duluth, whatever was rotting inside my marriage, it could rot for 10 more days. These were his days. Not mine. Not hers. His. I should back up. Megan and I met at a community fundraiser in the fall of 2020. I was 3 years out of my first marriage. No fireworks, no drama, just two people who realized they'd been better roommates than partners. No kids. We split the furniture and wished each other well. Took me a while to want to try again. Megan was there volunteering, running the bake sale table, and she had this laugh that carried across a gymnasium. Full-throated, head back, completely unself-conscious. She was recently divorced, had a 7-year-old boy, and was wound so tight you could practically see the guardrails she'd built around herself. Friendly, warm, charming. But she kept you at exactly the distance she wanted, and if you tried to step closer before she was ready, she'd find a reason to disappear. I didn't push. That's not who I am. I'm a plant operator. I monitor gauges. I watch systems. I wait for things to be ready before I adjust them. So I was patient, and I let her set the pace. And one Saturday I came over to fix a leaky faucet because she'd mentioned it in passing and I had the tools in my truck anyway. Zach was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up and said, "Are you Mom's boyfriend?" And Megan nearly choked on her coffee. I said, "I'm the guy fixing the sink. What subject?" He said, "Fractions." I said, "Fractions are just division pretending to be fancy." And he laughed. And that was the beginning. I didn't try to be his dad. His biological father was a man named Kyle Larson, lived out in Amarillo, worked oil rigs, saw Zach once a year at Christmas when he remembered, which wasn't every year, paid the bare minimum in child support and called it done. So there was this gap in Zach's life the size and shape of a father, and I could see it. But I also knew that if I tried to fill it too fast, I'd just be another man who let him down. So I showed up. That was my whole strategy. I fixed the bike when the chain came off. I helped with the homework. I showed up to the school thing when Megan had to work late. I didn't announce myself. I just was there. One evening, Zach was maybe 8 by then. We were all watching a movie on the couch, some animated thing with talking animals, and Zach leaned against my side and said, "Can you pass the popcorn, Vin?" Not Mr. Kowalski. Vin. And that was it. That was the turning point. Not some dramatic moment. Just a kid deciding, in his own quiet way, that I was safe. The cabin trips started that first summer. My idea. I'd been going up to Boundary Waters since I was a kid myself. My dad used to take me before his back gave out. I rented a cabin on a lake so small it didn't have a name, just a number on a DNR map. And I took Zach fishing. He caught his first walleye on day 2. 14 inches. He screamed so loud he scared every bird out of a 50-yard radius, and I had to grab the net because he was shaking too hard to land it himself. Megan was watching from the porch. When I looked up, she was crying. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind where you see something you were afraid to hope for. We got married 6 months later. The good years. And they were good. I want you to know that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the whole thing was rotten from the start, because it wasn't. Megan was funny and sharp, and she kept the house full of books, and she sang off-key in the shower, and she remembered every single person's birthday. We had dinner together almost every night. I worked my shifts at the plant, she worked at the library, and in between we built something that felt, to me, like the real thing. But here's what I didn't understand until later. Megan grew up in a house where the volume was always turned up. Shouting, slamming doors, her parents splitting and reconciling every 6 months like it was a hobby. Chaos was her baseline, and she'd tell you she hated it. And she did. But there's a difference between what you hate and what you're wired for. Stability, to Megan, felt like being ignored. When I came home and didn't have some crisis to unload, when I just sat on the couch and watched a game and was content, she read that as indifference. She mistook the absence of turbulence for the absence of love. I'm not making excuses for her. I'm telling you what I figured out after the fact, when I had plenty of sleepless nights to run the tape back. And I should mention Nicole Pruitt, because she matters. Nicole was Megan's closest friend. Had been for 6 years. They did everything together. Book club, school pickup, girls' nights, double dates with their husbands. Nicole's husband was a dentist named Derek, practiced over in Superior, Wisconsin. They had 2 little girls who treated Zach like a big brother. We'd been to their house a dozen times. They'd been to our cabin. Derek grilled steaks and told bad jokes and went to church every Sunday and shook your hand like he meant it. Remember those names. They're going to matter. We came back from the trip on a Thursday in late July. Drove 4 hours south with the windows down because the AC in my truck was giving out. And Zach fell asleep against the window with his hat pulled over his eyes and his hand still holding the fishing magazine he'd been reading. I carried him inside even though he was getting too big for that, and Megan met us at the door and I hugged her and told her about the fish and showed her photos on my camera, and I acted like everything was fine. I was terrifyingly good at it. Turns out when your job is monitoring systems for irregularities, you learn to keep your face still even when something's redlining. I gave myself 5 days. Not to snoop. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't going to go through her phone or follow her or any of that. I just watched. The way you watch a gauge you don't trust. First night back, about 9:15, Megan stepped out to the porch to get some air. She was on the phone for 20 minutes. I could hear her through the kitchen window. Not the words, just the sound. The rhythm. She laughed in a way I hadn't heard in a year, this low, loose laugh that used to be mine. Second day, nothing. She was home, she was normal, she made pasta and asked about my week back at work. I nearly talked myself into believing Zach had been wrong. Kids hear things. Kids misinterpret. Third night, she told me she was going to Nicole's for book club. She came home at 11:40. In 4 years, book club had never gone past 10. I was in bed pretending to be asleep when she slid in next to me. She smelled like restaurant. Not like Nicole's kitchen. Like restaurant. Garlic and wine and that particular warmth of a place that isn't your house. Fourth day, I did the laundry. In the pocket of her jeans, I found a receipt. A place in Superior, Wisconsin. Not a chain, a sit-down spot on the waterfront. Not somewhere Megan had ever mentioned. Not somewhere she'd go alone on a Tuesday. Fifth day, she left her phone on the counter while she showered. I didn't scroll through her messages. I didn't open her photos. I wasn't going to make myself that man. I checked one thing, the last call she'd made. The contact name was NP, Nicole Pruitt. That made sense. They called each other constantly. Except I'd been watching for 5 days, and the things that didn't add up were starting to form a shape. I went to bed that Friday night and I lay there listening to Megan breathe. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to play detective. I wasn't going to creep around my own life like a man who needed proof to trust his own gut. I was going to sit her down and end it. Saturday morning. Zach was at a friend's house for a sleepover. The kitchen was quiet. I made coffee. 2 cups, because even then, even already knowing what I knew, I still poured her a cup out of habit. She came down in her robe and sat across from me and took the mug and said, "Thanks, babe." I let her take a sip. Then I said it. "We need to talk. I know what's going on. I'm not going to ask who. I don't care who. I'm telling you it's over." She set the mug down. "What are you talking about?" "Don't." I kept my voice even. Not cold, just even. "Zach heard you, on the phone, late at night. Our kid heard you, Megan." I said our, not your. I know I did that on purpose, even in the moment. Because Zach was mine. Maybe not by blood, but by every single thing that matters more than blood, and she was going to hear me claim him. The color left her face. And I could see the exact moment she recalculated. Not guilt about the affair, not remorse for what she'd done to me. The fact that Zach knew. That's what hit her. The audience she couldn't manage. "It's not what you think," she started. "It was just, things between us have been." I said, "I don't care who. I don't care why. I care that you did it in a house where our kid could hear it. That's it. I've had enough." I stood up and walked to the bedroom. I'd already thought about what to pack. I'd been running it in my head all night. 1 duffel. Enough for a week. I'd come back for the rest. She followed me down the hall. "Vincent, wait. Can we please talk about this like adults?" I zipped the bag. Looked at her. "That's exactly what I'm doing." I walked to the front door. She stood in the hallway with her arms crossed, and I could see the machinery spinning behind her eyes, trying to find the right words, the right angle, the thing that would make me stay long enough for her to regain control of the situation. But I was already out. Not in anger, in clarity. There's a difference, and she could see it, and it scared her more than yelling would have. I drove to Russell Bauer's apartment on the east side of town. Russ was my closest friend, worked the same plant, went through his own divorce 3 years back and came out the other side with a crummy apartment and a decent attitude about it. I sat in his parking lot for 10 minutes before I went inside. That's where the grief found me. Not in the kitchen, not in front of her. In a parking lot, alone in my truck, with the engine off and the windows up. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and I just came apart for about 5 minutes. Then I put myself back together because that's what you do, and I went upstairs and knocked on Russ's door. He opened it in sweatpants and a Vikings jersey, took one look at my face and said, "Couch is yours. Beer's in the fridge. Tell me when you're ready." I wasn't ready that night. But by the second beer, I told him. And Russ, to his credit, didn't say, "I told you so," or "all women," or any of that garbage. He just listened. And then he said, "Monday morning, you file. Don't wait. The one who files first controls the tempo." Russ was a simple man in a lot of ways, but he wasn't wrong about that. Monday morning, I was at the St. Louis County Courthouse when the doors opened. Filing for divorce in Minnesota is straightforward, no-fault state, which means the reason doesn't matter to the court. You check a box that says the marriage is irretrievably broken, and that's that. No need to prove anything. No need to tell them your wife was whispering, "I love you" to another man while your stepson lay awake down the hall. The filing was the easy part. The hard part came when I asked the clerk about custody. She was a heavy-set woman with reading glasses on a chain, and she'd probably sat behind that counter for 20 years. But when I said the word stepson, Her face did this thing. Not pity, exactly. More like the look a doctor gives you when the test results aren't good. Is the child biologically yours? No. Have you legally adopted him? No. Then you'll want to talk to a family law attorney. You don't have presumptive rights. I knew that. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd always known it. But hearing it said out loud in a government building, under fluorescent lights, while holding a manila envelope with the word dissolution printed on it, that was different. That made it real. 4 years of showing up, 4 years of tucked-in bedtimes and packed lunches and teaching him to cast a line, and in the eyes of the state of Minnesota, I was a stranger. I called 3 attorneys from the parking lot. The first 2 were general practice, and they both said variations of the same thing. Step-parent visitation in Minnesota is an uphill battle, and without the mother's consent, you're looking at a long, expensive fight with no guarantee. Russ found the third one. He called me that evening and said, "I've been asking around. There's a woman in Minneapolis, Angela Prescott. She handles these exact cases. She's not cheap." How not cheap? $3.50 an hour. I did the math in my head. Then I called her anyway. Angela Prescott had a voice like a judge and the patience of a woman who'd heard every sad story in the state of Minnesota and still chose to do the work. She didn't give me sympathy. She gave me information, which was better. Minnesota Statute 257C.08, she said. It allows courts to grant visitation to a non-parent who has lived with a child for 2 or more years and established a parent-like relationship if denying visitation would be harmful to the child. The burden of proof is on you. What does that mean in practice? It means the most important person in this case isn't you, and it isn't your wife. It's Zach. If he can articulate the bond and a psychologist confirms it, we have a real chance. But if Megan fights it, and she probably will, this is going to be ugly, and it's going to be expensive, and you need to decide right now if you're willing to go through that. I already decided. Good. Then let's get to work. Here's where the story takes a turn I didn't see coming, and I need you to understand that I meant what I said in that kitchen. I didn't care who. I really didn't. Knowing who wouldn't change what happened, and it wouldn't help me get visitation. The affair was Megan's problem. The identity of the other man was Megan's mess. I was focused on one thing: Zach. But the information came to me anyway. Because life doesn't care about your priorities. About a week after I moved out, early August, I went back to the house while Megan was at work. I needed to grab a few more of my things, and Zach had asked me, over the phone, sneaking a call from the library where Megan worked, which should tell you something about the situation, for some stuff from his room. Specific stuff. His favorite fishing lure, a blue Rapala. His journal. A hoodie. I packed the bag. And while I was folding the hoodie, a piece of paper slipped out from under Zach's pillow. A drawing. Colored pencil on lined notebook paper. The kind of thing a kid does late at night when he can't sleep and doesn't have anyone to talk to. It was a picture of a woman standing on a porch holding a phone. The sky was dark. He'd pressed so hard with a black crayon that the paper was shiny. The woman was small and the porch was big, and the whole thing had this feeling of smallness and secrecy that made my chest tight. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, she calls DP every night. DP. I stood in my stepson's room holding a child's drawing, and the floor shifted under me. Not NP, not Nicole Pruitt. DP, Derek Pruitt. Nicole's husband. The dentist from Superior. The man who grilled steaks at our barbecues. The man who shook my hand every Sunday at church and said, Good to see you, Vince. The husband of Megan's best friend. The father of two little girls who called Zach their cousin. I'm going to tell you what I didn't do, because it matters. I didn't punch the wall. I didn't call Megan. I didn't drive to Derek's practice in Superior and make a scene. I folded the drawing carefully, put it in my back pocket, and finished packing Zach's bag. I locked the house, got in my truck, and drove to Russ's apartment at the speed limit. Russ was in the kitchen making spaghetti. I walked in and said, "It's Derek Pruitt." The wooden spoon stopped moving. "Nicole's husband? You've got to be kidding me." I wish I was. Russ set the spoon down on the counter and said a word I won't repeat. Then he said it again. Then he looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" "Right now? I'm going to eat that spaghetti. Then I'm going to think." And I did think. For about a week, I thought about almost nothing else. Not in a spiraling way. In a working way. The way I think at the plant when a system goes down and there are 15 things that need to happen, but only if you do them in the right order. I called Angela. Does the identity of the affair partner matter for Zach's case? Not directly. Minnesota is no fault. But if we can show that Megan is making decisions about Zach based on pressure from a third party, specifically decisions that aren't in Zach's best interest, that's relevant to character assessment. I filed that away. Next, I went through our joint finances. Not because I was petty, because Angela told me to be thorough, and she was right. What I found was a pattern. For 6 months, Megan had been moving small amounts into a separate account. 50 here, 80 there. Nothing that would trip an alarm on its own, but together it added up to just over $2,000. She'd been building herself an exit ramp while I was building Zach a treehouse. That told me something important. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was planned. I moved my paycheck to a new individual account. Photographed every joint asset, the house, the truck, the saving statements. Angela told me to be meticulous, and I was. When your hands are shaking, it helps to have a checklist. Russ, over beers one night, said what I knew he'd say eventually. "You need to tell Nicole." I know. When? When the timing is right for Zach's case, not a day before. Russ looked at me for a long moment. "You're thinking 3 moves ahead." "I'm thinking about my kid." Then Megan called, crying. She said she'd ended it with Derek. She said it was a mistake. She said she wanted to try counseling, that she'd do whatever it took. "You ended it because you got caught," I said. "I'm not interested in being your backup plan." I hung up. And I felt, I'll be honest with you, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness. Just a kind of emptiness, like the sound after a machine shuts off and the room is suddenly very quiet. A few days later, I had Zach for an afternoon. Megan had grudgingly agreed to some informal visits, probably hoping it made her look cooperative. We were eating ice cream at this place on Superior Street, and Zach said, casual as can be, "Mom's friend Nicole's husband came over yesterday. He was helping Mom fix the sink." I set my cone down. "Derek came over?" "Yeah, he was there when I got home from Tyler's." The affair wasn't over. Megan had lied. Of course she had. And now Derek Pruitt was in my house, around my kid, fixing a sink he had no business fixing. Something recalibrated inside me. Up until that moment, some part of me had been leaving a door open. Not for reconciliation, but for civility. For the possibility that we could navigate this like reasonable people. That door closed. and I started thinking about timing. Late August, 3 weeks out from the day I'd packed that duffel bag in the kitchen. I called Nicole Pruitt. "Hey, Vincent, I've been meaning to reach out. I heard about you and Megan, and I'm so sorry. Are you doing okay?" "I appreciate that, Nicole. Can we meet for coffee? There's something I need to talk to you about." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "I'll explain when I see you." We met at a place downtown. Neutral ground. Public. I'd thought about how to do this for days, and I'd decided there was no gentle version. You don't cushion a sledgehammer. You just swing clean. She was already at a table when I got there, both hands around a mug, looking at me with the kind of open concern that made what I was about to do 10 times harder. Nicole was a good person. Not a perfect person. Nobody is. But a genuinely kind woman who baked casseroles when you had surgery and remembered your kid's birthday and showed up when people needed her. She didn't deserve this. I sat down across from her. "Nicole, there's no good way to say what I'm about to say, so I'm just going to say it. Megan's affair, the reason my marriage is ending, was with Derek." She didn't blink. Didn't gasp. Didn't do any of the things you'd expect. Her face just stopped, like someone hit pause. She stared at me for maybe 5 seconds, which is a very long time when you're sitting across from a woman whose life you're rearranging. Then, very quietly, "How long?" "At least 6 months. Based on what I've found." "Who else knows?" "You, me, my lawyer, and an 11-year-old boy who drew a picture of a mother making phone calls on the porch at night." Something changed in Nicole's face right then. Not collapse. The opposite. Something tightened, hardened, like wet clay being fired. She set her mug down and sat up straighter, and she asked, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, "Do you have proof?" I showed her Zach's drawing. I showed her the receipt from the restaurant in Superior. She looked at the receipt and closed her eyes and said, "The anchor. He told me he was at a dental conference that night. He told me—" She stopped, opened her eyes, put the receipt back on the table and squared it with the edge like she was organizing a desk. "I want you to know something," she said. "If this goes to court, about Zach, I will testify. I've seen you with that boy for 4 years. You're his father in every way that counts, and I will say so under oath." I hadn't expected that. I'd come to tell her the truth because she deserved it, and because the timing was finally right, and because I needed her to know before it all came out sideways. I hadn't come looking for an ally, but I'd found one. Then she told me something that changed the whole picture. "Derek's been calling Megan. I hear his phone at night. He goes out to the garage. I thought it was work. But Vincent, he's been telling her to fight you on the visitation." "How do you know that?" "Because he's sloppy with his texts, and I started looking last week. Before you called me, actually. I had a feeling. Turns out my feeling was right." She showed me a string of messages on her own phone. Texts Derek had sent Megan that Nicole had found and screenshotted. One of them said, "Don't let him get visitation. If Zach talks to a therapist, everything comes out." Let me say that again so you really hear it. This man, this church-going, handshaking, steak-grilling man, was pressuring my wife to keep me away from my kid. Not because he cared about Zach, not because he had any opinion about what was best for an 11-year-old boy, because he was afraid. Because if Zach got to talk to a counselor, Zach would talk about what he'd heard, and Derek's careful little life would come apart. He was using a child as a shield, and Megan was letting him. Nicole stood up. put on her sunglasses even though we were indoors, which told me everything about how close she was to losing it. I'm going to need my own lawyer. Thank you, Vincent. I mean that. She walked out. 2 marriages blown to pieces. 1 man responsible for both. Nicole didn't waste time. She filed the next morning. And she didn't play it quiet. She had Derek served at his dental practice. The process server walked in past the reception desk and handed him the papers in front of his staff. I didn't ask her to do that. That was all, Nicole. The woman who baked casseroles had steel in her I'd never seen before. Derek panicked. Of course he did. He called Megan. Megan called me. I didn't answer. She called again. I didn't answer that either. Then Derek himself showed up at Russ's apartment. I wasn't home, thank God. Russ was. Russ told me about it that evening, leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed. He came to the door, red-faced, sweating. Told me to tell you, and this is a direct quote, "Tell your friend he needs to keep his mouth shut. This is between me and my wife." What did you say? I said, get off my porch. Russ shrugged. He got off the porch. I called Angela and reported the visit. She documented it. Potential harassment, she said. Relevant if Derek escalated. She was building a file the way I'd build a maintenance log. Every entry dated, every detail noted. And then came the part I'd anticipated but still wasn't ready for. The ripple effect. Duluth isn't a small town exactly, but it's not anonymous either. People know each other. The Pruitts were known. Church, neighborhood, school. Word got around fast. Nicole's friends rallied to her. Derek's colleagues started hearing things. A few patients quietly transferred to other practices. And Megan ended up in a place I don't think she expected. She wasn't the wronged wife. She wasn't the sympathetic single mom. She was the other woman. To her neighbors, her co-workers, her own family, she'd betrayed not just her husband but her best friend. Her mother called me one evening, voice shaking, and said, "I'm sorry, Vincent. I raised her better than this." I told her it wasn't her fault. I meant it. Under all that pressure, Megan did what cornered people do. She circled up. And the first thing she did was start cutting off my access to Zach. Canceled visits. Suddenly, Zach had a cold every other weekend. Suddenly, Zach had plans. She was building a wall around the boy, not to protect him, but to protect herself. I knew because Zach told me. He called me from the library phone, his mother's own workplace, which had a bitter irony to it, and whispered, "Mom won't let me see you this weekend. She said I have plans, but I don't have plans, Vin." My hand tightened on the phone. "Okay, bud, listen to me. This is temporary. I'm working on it." "Promise?" "Promise." I hung up and called Angela within 30 seconds. "She's blocking me, canceled visits, making excuses." Angela's voice was calm and sharp at the same time, like a blade that's been properly maintained. "Then we file the motion. Right now." September. 6 weeks since I'd walked out of my own kitchen with a duffel bag. Angela filed the petition under Minnesota Statute 257C.08, a request for visitation rights as a de facto parent with a significant emotional bond to the child. She built the case the way you'd build a bridge, every support load-bearing, nothing decorative. 4 years of documented parenting, school records listing me as emergency contact, parent-teacher conference sign-in sheets with my signature, little league rosters where I was the assistant coach, photos from every birthday, every fish caught, every Christmas morning. Medical records from the time I took Zach to the ER when he fell off his bike and needed 4 stitches. I was the one who drove, the one who held his hand, the one who signed the intake form because Megan was in Minneapolis at a conference. Megan's attorney, a local guy, not a specialist, filed a response arguing that I had no legal standing, that the separation was too recent, and that I was using Zach as leverage in the divorce. That last one stung, I won't lie, because it was designed to sting. But it also told me Megan's lawyer didn't have much to work with, because when your strongest argument is questioning the other person's motives, it means you can't argue the facts. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation. A child psychologist named Dr. Janet Olson was assigned to interview Zach, Megan, and me separately. She'd write a report. The judge would use it to decide. And here's where Derek's shadow stretched over everything one more time. Through Nicole, Angela got hold of texts showing Derek was coaching Megan on what to say to the evaluator. One text in particular: "Don't let him get visitation. If Zach talks to a therapist, everything comes out." Angela read that text the way a hunter reads tracks. "This is no longer just a custody case," she told me over the phone. "We can show the court that Megan's objection isn't about Zach's welfare. It's about protecting a third party. That changes the whole landscape." Late September, 2 months since the doc, Dr. Olson's office was in a professional building near the hospital. Carpet, neutral paint, the kind of chair you sink into whether you want to or not. She was about 60, gray-haired, glasses, and she had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she was reading a page you didn't know you'd written. My interview was first. She asked the expected questions: how long I'd lived with Zach, what our routines were, how I saw my role. I brought the photos. Not a stack of them, just a handful. Zach's first walleye. The treehouse the day we finished it. Him standing in front of it with paint on his face. His school picture from 3rd grade, which he'd signed on the back in big letters. To Vin. From Zach. I talked for about 40 minutes. I told her about the homework, the camping trips, the bike riding. I told her about the time he had a nightmare about a bear and came into our bedroom and climbed into bed between us, and I carried him back to his room and sat with him until he fell asleep. I told her about the treehouse, how he'd picked blue paint, and I'd let him, even though it clashed with everything. I got through most of it fine. But when I told her about the day he learned to ride a bike, the way he looked back at me over his shoulder, this huge, terrified grin, pedaling for the first time without my hand on the seat, my voice broke. Just for a second. I cleared my throat and kept going. Dr. Olson made a note. Megan's interview happened the following week. I wasn't there, obviously, but Angela got the summary in the official report later. Megan was defensive. She insisted she was a good mother. And she was. I'll say that even now. She loved Zach. That was never the question. But when Olson asked her why she was blocking visitation, Megan went vague. We need time to heal as a family. It's a confusing period for him. I think distance from the situation is healthiest. What she never said, according to the report, was that Zach didn't want to see me. Olson noted that specifically. In 45 minutes of interview, Megan never once claimed her son wanted the separation. Then came Zach's interview, and I'm going to tell you about it the way Angela relayed it to me, because it's the part of this story I carry with me every day. Zach walked into Olson's office and sat in a chair that was too big for him. He was nervous, bouncing his knee, looking around. Olson let him settle. She offered him water. He shook his head. Can you tell me about Vincent? She asked. Zach said, Vin is my real dad. Not stepdad. Not mom's husband. Real dad. He takes me fishing. He taught me how to tie knots. Not just regular knots, but like the good ones for fly lines. He built me a tree house and let me paint it whatever color I wanted. I picked blue. Olson asked about Kyle, his biological father in Texas. Zach was quiet for a second. Then, he's just a man. He sends a card sometimes. He doesn't even know what grade I'm in. And then Olson asked the question that mattered most. How do you feel about not seeing Vincent? Zach sat there. Long pause. An 11-year-old boy finding the words for something that doesn't have easy words. Like the lake is gone, he said. Angela called me that evening. We got the evaluation. Olson's report says Zach has a primary paternal attachment to you. She's recommending regular visitation. She specifically states that severing the relationship would cause significant emotional harm. I sat down on Russ's couch and put my head in my hands. Not grief. Relief. The kind of relief that's so big it hurts. But it wasn't over yet. Because Derek Pruitt, cornered and losing everything, his wife, his reputation, his standing, did something desperate. Something that, if I'm honest, I should have seen coming. Early October. I got a call from Angela, and her voice had a different quality to it. Not worried, exactly. Tight. Kyle Larson filed an objection to your visitation petition. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Kyle? Zach's biological father? The man in Amarillo who hasn't called his son in 7 months? The same. His attorney in Texas sent a letter to the court objecting to a non-related party seeking parental access to my client's son. He claims he wants to be more involved in Zach's life. Since when? Since Derek Pruitt called him 4 times in 1 week. There it was. Derek, unable to fight me directly, had found the one person in the world who had legal standing to block me. The man who'd contributed nothing to Zach's life except his last name and a Christmas card with $50 when he remembered. Derek had tracked Kyle down and convinced him to file the objection. He'd even offered to cover Kyle's legal costs, which was a remarkable level of desperation for a man trying to protect an affair. I'll tell you what that felt like. It felt like being at the bottom of a hole you've been climbing out of for weeks, and someone dumps a load of gravel on your head. But Angela wasn't done. Here's what we're going to do. I'm subpoenaing Kyle's communication records, his visitation history, and his child support payments. And I'm subpoenaing Derek's phone records to show the connection. The evidence she compiled was brutal. Kyle had seen Zach 3 times in 4 years. He owed $11,400 in back child support. His last text to Zach had been 7 months ago. A single message that said, "Hey buddy, happy B-Day," sent 2 days after Zach's actual birthday. And Derek's phone records showed 4 calls to Kyle's number in the week before the objection was filed. The math was simple. At the pretrial hearing, Angela laid it out for the judge. Not dramatically, methodically. This wasn't a father advocating for his child. This was a third party manipulating the legal system to protect himself from the consequences of an affair. The judge, a woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen every version of human selfishness the family court system could produce, was visibly displeased. She struck Kyle's objection from the record and warned Megan's attorney that any further coordinated interference would result in sanctions. Kyle vanished back to Texas. I imagine he went back to his rig and his bar and his life that didn't include Zach, because it never really had. And Derek's last card had been played, and it hadn't worked, And the look on his face when the judge made her ruling was the look of a man watching a door close that he would never open again. Mid-October. 2.5 months from the day Zach said those 7 words on the dock, I walked into a family courtroom in Duluth. It was nothing like what you see in movies. No wood paneling, no dramatic overhead lighting. Fluorescent bulbs, worn carpet, a judge's bench that had coffee ring stains on the edge. A room where 1,000 families had come apart and been reassembled in different configurations, and nobody had bothered to renovate. Angela presented our case, methodical, organized. She put 4 years of my life with Zach on a table and let the evidence speak. The photos, the school records, the medical forms, the Little League rosters. Dr. Olson's evaluation, every word of it. Nicole's written statement, which was read into the record. I have watched Vincent Kowalski raise Zachary Larson for 4 years. He is patient, present, and loving. He is the best father I have ever seen. And I say that as someone who was married to a man I thought was a good one. Then the evidence of Derek's interference, the texts, the Kyle orchestration, the pattern of a woman being pressured to keep a child away from his primary father figure, not for the child's sake, but for the sake of a man trying to cover his tracks. Megan's attorney did what he could. He argued that Vincent's emotional attachment didn't override a mother's parental rights. He argued the separation was too recent for meaningful evaluation. He didn't touch the Derek issue. He couldn't. Then Megan took the stand. Her own attorney asked her standard questions, and she answered them competently. But on cross, Angela asked 2 questions that mattered. Mrs. Kowalski, has Zachary ever told you that he does not want to see Vincent? Long pause. Megan looked at her hands. No. Has Zachary asked to see Vincent since the separation? Longer pause. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. Yes. Angela sat down. She didn't need to say anything else. The judge took a recess. Came back in 40 minutes. Granted visitation under Minnesota. Stat 257C.08. Every other weekend. Friday evening to Sunday evening. 2 consecutive weeks in the summer. Alternating holidays. Phone and video contact twice a week. Court ordered. Ironclad. Megan cried. Not the way she'd cried on the phone when she'd begged me to come back. This was different. This was the sound of a woman realizing that her 11-year-old son had chosen the man she'd betrayed, and that a judge and a psychologist and her own best friend had all agreed with him. I didn't feel triumph. I felt like I'd been holding my breath for 10 weeks, and someone had finally told me I could exhale. I walked out of the courthouse. Russ was leaning against my truck in the parking lot, arms crossed, wearing the same Vikings jersey he'd been wearing the night I showed up at his door with a duffel bag. Well, I got in the truck, closed the door, and I cried for the second time in my adult life. Russ stood outside and didn't say a word. He just waited. The divorce was finalized in December, quick by Minnesota standards. Megan got the house. She had Zach. It was the marital home. It made sense. I got a fair split of the rest. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Duluth, 10 minutes from Zach's school. The second bedroom was small. I put a bunk bed in it. The top bunk for the theoretical future, the bottom for Zach. A fishing poster on the wall. A blue-painted bookshelf we built together on his first weekend visit, and I let him pick the shade, and he picked the same blue as the treehouse. On the door, a handmade sign in his handwriting, Zach's room. That sign is still there. I never moved it. Megan didn't become a villain. I know some people want that. They want the cheater to fall apart, drink too much, lose the job, become a cautionary tale. That didn't happen. She kept working at the library. She kept the house clean. She was, by all accounts, still a decent mother. But something had shifted between her and Zach that no amount of normalcy could repair. He was polite with her, respectful, but careful. The way you're careful around something that's hurt you and might hurt you again. He didn't mention the phone calls. He didn't bring up Derek. He didn't need to. She lived with what she'd done in the silence between them, and I think that was worse than anything anyone could have said. Derek's world collapsed on a different timeline. Nicole's divorce was final by February. She got the house, primary custody of their girls, and a support order that reflected the judge's opinion of Derek's character. Several patients left his practice. His church friends evaporated. He moved to a smaller apartment in Superior and became the kind of man you see alone at a restaurant reading his phone. Nicole and I developed something I didn't expect. A friendship. Not romantic. Just two people who'd been standing on opposite sides of the same bomb when it went off and somehow ended up helping each other dust off. She invited Zach to her daughter's birthday parties. The kids stayed close. Nicole and I would sometimes sit on her porch while the kids played in the yard and drink coffee and say nothing in particular. And it was easy in the way that things are easy between people who don't need to explain themselves to each other. Kyle sent Zach a Christmas card in December. $50. Zach put the money in a jar on his nightstand, saving for a new fishing rod. He didn't send a thank you note. I didn't make him. In March, Megan called me. It had been weeks since we'd spoken about anything other than pickup times and school schedules. Her voice was different. Not crying, not angry, just small. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I waited. Was I a good mother? Before all of this? Was I good to him? I leaned against the kitchen counter in my apartment and looked through the doorway into Zach's room, where the blue bookshelf was and the fishing poster was and the sign on the door was, and I thought about the woman who'd cried on the porch watching her son catch his first fish. Yes, I said. You were. She hung up. That was the last real conversation we ever had that wasn't about logistics. July. 1 year out from the dock. Same cabin, same lake. Same 2-week window, court-ordered and ironclad, just like Angela had promised. We pulled up in the truck and Zach was out the door before I had it in park, running down the trail to the water to check if our spot was still there. It was. The dock had a new board on the left side where the old one had finally rotted through, but otherwise it was the same. The lake was the same. The pines were the same. We unpacked. Set up the cabin. I put the food away while Zach organized the tackle box, which he did now with the precision of a kid who'd been fishing with a man who took organization seriously. We ate sandwiches standing up in the kitchen because neither of us wanted to waste the light. Evening came the way it comes up there, slowly, like the sky can't decide whether to let go of the day. We were on the dock, rods in the water. The lake going from blue to gold to something that doesn't have a name, just a feeling. Zach reeled in, checked his bait, cast back out. Then he looked at me sideways and said, Vin, next year can we get a bigger boat? I looked at this kid. 12 now. Taller. Still quiet, still perceptive, still the kind of person who says more in 7 words than most people say in 700. Not mine by blood. Mine by every single thing that matters more. Yeah, buddy, we'll get a bigger boat. He grinned and turned back to the water, and the reel hummed, and the lake held the last light. the way it always did, and that was enough.